The elevator lurched to a stop between the seventh and eighth floors, trapping me with the man who had just destroyed my career. Richard Blackwood adjusted his Italian silk tie, seemingly oblivious to me pressed against the opposite wall, clutching a cardboard box containing 3 years of my professional life. "Mechanical issues again," he muttered, pressing the emergency button with theatrical annoyance. "This building is falling apart, just like everything else I'm forced to deal with." My knuckles went white around the box handle. 20 minutes ago, Richard had humiliated me in front of the entire accounting department, his voice echoing through the open office as he announced my termination for gross insubordination and questionable competence. "Maya Patel, ladies and gentlemen," he had declared with a cruel smile. "Living proof that participation trophies don't prepare you for the real world. Perhaps your little community college should have offered courses in professional behavior along with basic arithmetic." The elevator shuddered and resumed its descent. Richard straightened his shoulders, preparing to exit into his domain like a king returning to his court. But as the door slid open, he made one final mistake. "You should be thanking me," he said without looking at me. "This is the best lesson you'll ever get about how the world really works. Maybe now you'll learn your place." I watched him stride toward his corner office, greeting employees who scattered like startled birds at his approach. My reflection in the polished elevator door showed a broken woman, tear-stained cheeks, trembling hands, defeated posture. But appearances could be deceiving. 24 hours later, I sat in my apartment surrounded by 3 monitors, 2 laptops, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. The broken woman from the elevator was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous: a forensic accountant with a photographic memory, unlimited time, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Before we dive deeper, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments, what would you do if the man who ruined your life thought he could walk away untouched? I had always been exceptional with numbers, but Richard's condescending dismissal of my community college degree revealed his fundamental ignorance. That degree had been earned summa cum laude, while I worked 2 jobs to support my disabled mother. More importantly, it had been followed by advanced certifications in forensic accounting, digital financial analysis, and fraud investigation, qualifications Richard had never bothered to review because he was too busy admiring his own reflection. The first anomaly appeared within 6 hours of beginning my investigation. Payroll records showed 23 employees, but the state unemployment insurance payments covered only 19. For people were working off the books, likely undocumented immigrants being paid below minimum wage with no benefits or protections. My fingers flew across my keyboard, accessing databases through legal methods I had learned in my fraud certification courses. Public records, business filings, tax liens, all painting a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond simple wage theft. But it was the discovery at 3:47 a.m. that made my blood run cold. Hidden in archived email servers was correspondence between Richard and a network of business owners discussing something called the efficiency protocol. The messages were coded, but my training helped me decrypt their meaning: a coordinated system for exploiting workers while avoiding detection. I wasn't dealing with one corrupt employer. I had stumbled onto a criminal conspiracy that spanned dozens of businesses across 3 states. I leaned back in my chair, mind racing. My personal revenge against Richard had just become something much larger. But first, I needed proof that would hold up in federal court. Sarah Chin answered her phone on the second ring, her voice hushed and nervous. "Maya? It's 6 a.m. Is everything okay?" "Meet me at the Starbucks on 5th Street in an hour," I said. "Come alone, and don't tell anyone you're meeting me." Sarah had been Richard's executive assistant for 8 years, invisible furniture in his daily operations. She saw everything, heard everything, and most importantly, had access to everything. When Sarah arrived, her usual timid demeanor was replaced by barely contained fury. "I saw what he did to you yesterday," she said without preamble. "It was unconscionable." "It gets worse," I replied, sliding a tablet across the table. "Look at this." Sarah's face went white as she scrolled through my preliminary findings. My God. The health insurance premiums. I process those deductions every month. I never realized. He's been stealing from all of us for years, I confirmed. But Sarah, there's something else. Something bigger. I need your help to prove it. I outlined my discovery of the wider conspiracy, watching Sarah's expression shift from shock to anger to cold determination. What do you need? Sarah asked finally. Access to Richard's private files. His real calendar, not the sanitized version he shows employees. His personal email account. And most importantly, I need to know about any meetings with other business owners. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up, I saw a transformation as dramatic as my own. There's a dinner meeting tonight, Sarah said. Richard asked me to book a private room at the Meridian Club. 12 people, all business owners. He was very specific about privacy and no written records. I felt my pulse quicken. Can you get me in? Not as a guest. But. Sarah paused, calculating. They'll need serving staff. I have a friend in catering. If you're willing to be invisible for one evening, you might hear everything you need. The Meridian Club occupied the top floor of the city's most expensive hotel, its private dining rooms designed for conversations that required absolute discretion. I adjusted my server's uniform and reviewed the wireless recording device concealed in my lapel pin, a piece of equipment that definitely hadn't been covered in my accounting courses. The dinner guests arrived separately, men and women in expensive suits who nodded politely at the serving staff while discussing weather and sports. But I recognized the signs of practiced deception. The way conversations stopped when servers approached, the careful attention to seating arrangements, the phones surrendered to a central basket before the meal began. Richard arrived last, his presence immediately commanding attention. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced as I poured water glasses, welcome to what I believe will be our most profitable quarter yet. What followed was 2 hours of systematic evil disguised as business strategy. They called it labor optimization, the systematic exploitation of vulnerable workers through coordinated hiring practices, shared blacklists of troublesome employees, and carefully structured wage theft that fell just below prosecution thresholds. I learned about the undocumented workers, paid cash at 2/3 minimum wage with the threat of deportation hanging over their heads. I heard about the college interns, promised valuable experience while working unpaid overtime. Most chilling were the discussions about targeting single mothers and recent immigrants, people desperate enough to accept exploitation without complaint. The key, Richard explained between courses, is maintaining plausible deniability. Individual violations might trigger investigations, but our distributed approach makes pattern recognition nearly impossible. A woman I didn't recognize leaned forward. What about digital forensics? These fraud investigators are getting more sophisticated. Richard's laugh was genuinely amused. Digital forensics require access to systems and records. We maintain clean official books and keep real operations compartmentalized. Besides, who's going to investigate us? Displaced employees? They're too busy trying to find new jobs to cause trouble. My hand trembled slightly as I refilled Richard's wine glass, but my expression remained perfectly neutral. The server was invisible, just as Sarah had promised. As the evening wound down, Richard distributed encrypted USB drives to each guest. Updated contact lists and operational protocols, he explained. Remember, these meetings never happened, and we never discussed anything beyond routine business cooperation. I memorized every face, every name mentioned, every detail about the conspiracy I had witnessed. But as I cleared dishes and prepared to leave, one final conversation stopped me cold. What about the Patel situation? Someone asked as I collected bread baskets near Richard's chair. Handled, Richard replied dismissively. Fired her yesterday for insubordination. These community college graduates always overestimate their value. She'll be delivering pizzas within a month. The table laughed, and I forced myself to maintain the blank expression expected of service staff. But inside, something crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. They had no idea what they were dealing with. I had expected my anonymous tip to the FBI to trigger a routine investigation, maybe a few interviews and document requests. I hadn't expected Agent Catherine Morris to call me directly 3 days later. Ms. Patel, we need to meet. This is much bigger than you realize. Agent Morris was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s with the intense focus of someone who had spent years chasing complex financial crimes. We met at a downtown federal building, in a conference room that smelled of coffee and determination. "Your evidence is remarkable," Morris began, spreading my compiled documents across the table. "But we've been tracking this network for 2 years without success. How did you gain access to information our federal task force couldn't obtain?" I chose my words carefully. I was employed by one of the target companies. I had legitimate access to financial records that revealed discrepancies. Legitimate access to encrypted email servers and private meeting recordings? Morris raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Patel, you're either remarkably lucky or remarkably skilled. Which is it?" I met the agent's gaze steadily. "I have advanced training in forensic accounting and digital analysis." When I realized the scope of what I had discovered, I felt obligated to gather comprehensive evidence. Morris studied me for a long moment. "You realize that some of your evidence-gathering methods might be considered questionable from a legal standpoint. Are you going to prosecute me for exposing federal crimes?" "On the contrary," Morris smiled for the first time. "I'm going to offer you a consulting contract. We need someone with your specific skills and access to help us build an airtight case. But it means you'll be working undercover, potentially for months, and there will be significant personal risk." I didn't hesitate. "What do you need me to do?" Returning to work for Richard while secretly gathering evidence for the FBI required a level of psychological compartmentalization I hadn't known I possessed. The official story was simple. I had begged for my job back, apologizing profusely for my unprofessional behavior, and accepting a demotion to entry-level bookkeeper. Richard's ego made him susceptible to the narrative. He enjoyed the public spectacle of my apparent humiliation, using my redemption as an object lesson for other employees about the consequences of challenging authority. "This is what happens when you swallow your pride and recognize your betters," he announced at the Monday staff meeting, me standing beside him with carefully practiced submission. "Ms. Patel has learned valuable lessons about respect and gratitude. I hope you all take note." I nodded humbly while memorizing the USB port locations on Richard's computer and noting which employees seemed uncomfortable with the public humiliation. Later, I would approach them individually, identifying potential allies and gathering additional evidence of the conspiracy's scope. But the most valuable intelligence came from my new role as Richard's reformed employee. He began including me in discussions he never would have shared before, enjoying the psychological power of forcing his former victim to facilitate his crimes. "Maya, I want you to review the Hartley Industries payroll integration," he said during my second week back. "They're implementing our efficiency protocols, and we need to ensure seamless financial coordination." I accepted the assignment with appropriate deference while internally cataloging another piece of the conspiracy puzzle. Hartley Industries employed over 200 people across 4 locations, all of whom would soon become victims of systematic wage theft unless I could stop it. Working with Agent Morris, I developed a routine for passing information without detection. Dead drops, encrypted communications, and careful documentation that would hold up in federal court. Each day brought new evidence, new victims, and new urgency to shut down the network before it expanded further. But I was playing a dangerous game, and Richard was beginning to notice inconsistencies. "Maya, step into my office." Richard's tone was different, sharper, more focused than his usual condescending drawl. I followed him into his corner office, noting the new security camera positioned to monitor employee workstations. "I've been reviewing our system access logs," Richard said, settling behind his mahogany desk with predatory calm. "There are some interesting patterns I'd like you to explain." My training kicked in, maintaining perfect composure while my mind raced through possible explanations. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Blackwood. Database queries at unusual hours. File access patterns that don't match your assigned responsibilities. Email server activity that seems remarkably sophisticated for someone in your position." Richard leaned forward, studying my face for tells. "You know, Maya, I've been thinking about your sudden transformation. From defiant troublemaker to grateful employee. It's almost too perfect. Like a performance." "I learned my lesson," I replied evenly. I was wrong to challenge you, and I'm grateful for the second chance. Are you? Richard's smile was cold. Because I've hired a security consultant to review our systems. Someone with expertise in detecting internal threats and corporate espionage. Should I be concerned about what he might find? I felt ice form in my stomach, but maintained my composure. Of course not. I have nothing to hide. We'll see. Richard dismissed me with a wave, but his eyes followed my movements as I left the office. That evening, I met Agent Morris at a coffee shop 6 miles from downtown, carefully checking for surveillance before entering. He's on to me, I reported without preamble. We need to accelerate the timeline. Morris cursed under her breath. How much time do we have? Days, maybe a week before his security consultant discovers the access patterns. But there's something else. Richard mentioned implementing protocols at Hartley Industries. If we don't move soon, 200 more workers become victims. Morris pulled out her phone. I'm calling the task force commander. We initiate raids tomorrow morning, simultaneously across all locations. Can you get me current employee rosters and financial records for final documentation? Already done, I replied, handing over an encrypted drive. Everything you need for warrants and asset seizure. But, Agent Morris, I want to be there when you arrest Richard. Maya, that's not protocol. I've risked everything for this investigation. I want to see his face when he realizes the little community college graduate brought down his empire. Morris considered for a moment, then nodded. Stay in communication. Tomorrow, at 8 a.m., this all comes to an end. I arrived at work early, ostensibly to catch up on filing, but actually to position myself for the FBI raids scheduled to begin at 8 a.m. sharp. I sat at my desk, hands steady as I processed routine paperwork, while federal agents prepared to simultaneously hit 12 locations across 3 states. Richard arrived at 7:45, earlier than usual, carrying a briefcase I hadn't seen before. His movements seemed hurried, almost panicked, as he headed straight to his office without his usual grand entrance. At exactly 8 a.m., I heard the elevator open and the distinct sound of multiple footsteps in the hallway. Federal agents. Nobody move. The office erupted in confusion as Agent Morris led a team of 6 agents through the main entrance while another team secured the back exits. Richard's door flew open as he tried to flee with his briefcase, only to find Agent Morris waiting for him. Richard Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, tax evasion, and racketeering, Morris announced, her voice carrying clearly through the silent office. Richard's eyes swept the room frantically until they landed on me, still seated calmly at my desk. For a moment, his face showed only confusion. Then understanding dawned, and his expression shifted through disbelief, rage, and finally something approaching respect. You, he said simply. The whole time it was you. I stood slowly, removing the wire I had worn every day for 3 weeks and placing it on my desk. Did you really think someone with forensic accounting training would overlook $2.3 million in stolen wages? But you came back. You apologized. I performed, I interrupted. The same way you performed respectability while systematically destroying lives. The difference is my performance served justice. Agent Morris stepped forward with handcuffs. Mr. Blackwood, you have the right to remain silent. As Richard was led away, he kept staring back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Later, I would recognize it as the look of someone discovering they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their reality. Sarah emerged from her office, her face bright with amazement and relief. Maya, you were FBI the whole time? Consultant, I corrected. But yes, I was working with federal agents to expose the conspiracy. Around the office, employees began asking questions, sharing stories of exploitation they had endured, expressing gratitude and disbelief in equal measure. I answered what I could while watching through the windows as similar scenes played out at 11 other locations. By noon, the Meridian Protocol was completely dismantled, its leaders facing federal prosecution, and its victims finally receiving justice. The trial lasted 6 weeks, with me serving as the government's star witness. My testimony was methodical, devastating, and impossible to refute. I walked the jury through $2.3 million in documented wage theft, showed them the encrypted communications proving conspiracy, and played recordings of the Meridian Club dinner that sealed the defendant's fate. Richard's defense team tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but the evidence was too comprehensive, too professionally gathered, and too clearly motivated by justice rather than personal animus. In his closing argument, Richard's attorney made one last desperate appeal. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case began with a personal vendetta. Ms. Patel admits she was angry about losing her job. Can we trust evidence gathered by someone with such clear bias?" I watched the jury's faces as Prosecutor Maria Hendricks delivered her rebuttal. Mr. Blackwood's attorney is correct that this case began with a personal injustice. But it didn't end there. Ms. Patel could have pursued simple revenge, damaging property, spreading rumors, seeking personal satisfaction. Instead, she chose to gather evidence, work with federal authorities, and ensure that hundreds of exploited workers received justice. The question isn't whether Ms. Patel was motivated by anger. The question is whether she channeled that anger into service of law and justice. The evidence clearly shows she did. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Richard received 15 years in federal prison. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 8 to 12 years. Asset forfeiture recovered over $50 million for distribution to exploited workers. But my sense of completion was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Elena Blackwood looked nothing like I had expected. Instead of the trophy wife suggested by gossip and divorce filings, she was a tired-looking woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and calloused hands. "I wanted to thank you," Elena said as we sat in my apartment living room. "But also to apologize." "Apologize for what?" Elena pulled out a worn photo showing a younger version of herself in work clothes. "I wasn't always married to Richard. 25 years ago, I was Elena Martinez, working as a seamstress in a garment factory. I knew what wage theft looked like because I lived it." I studied the photo, seeing a different person entirely from the woman who had appeared in society pages as Richard's wife. "When I married Richard, I thought I was escaping that world," Elena continued. "I knew he was demanding with employees, but I told myself that was just business. I chose not to look too closely at where his money came from." "You couldn't have known the extent." "I could have," Elena interrupted firmly. "I should have. Every expensive dinner, every luxury vacation, every piece of jewelry was paid for with stolen wages. I was complicit through willful ignorance." Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a check. The divorce settlement was substantial. "I'm donating every penny to organizations that fight workplace exploitation. But I wanted to give this to you personally." I looked at the check amount and gasped. "Elena, this is $50,000. I can't accept this." "You can, and you will. Not as payment, nothing could repay what you've done, but as investment. I know you're starting a nonprofit to help exploited workers. This is seed money to make sure you can help as many people as possible." I stared at the check, overwhelmed by the gesture and its implications. "How did you know about the nonprofit?" Elena smiled sadly. "Sarah Chin told me. She's helping you set up the legal framework, isn't she? Along with 3 other former employees who want to dedicate their lives to preventing what happened to all of you." I nodded, still processing the magnitude of Elena's gesture. The nonprofit had been a dream, something I hoped to establish after testifying in a few more federal cases. But with this funding, I could begin immediately. "There's one more thing," Elena said. "Richard wants to see you. He's been asking for months." My first instinct was refusal, but something in Elena's expression made me pause. "Why?" "I think he needs to understand what he became. And maybe you need to see what he's becoming." The Federal Correctional Facility was a study in institutional efficiency, all concrete and steel designed to contain people who had violated society's trust. I waited in the visitor's room, wondering why I had agreed to this meeting. Richard entered wearing prison-issued clothing that made him look smaller, diminished from the commanding figure who had once dominated my professional life. His expensive hair had gone gray, and his posture showed the weight of 3 years behind bars. "You came," he said, sitting across from me at the metal table. "Elena asked me to. I'm not sure why." Richard was quiet for a long moment, studying his hands. "I've had a lot of time to think. About what I did. About who I became. About the people I hurt." "Is this supposed to be an apology?" "It's supposed to be an attempt at understanding." Richard looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. "I convinced myself that I was providing jobs, creating opportunities, contributing to society. I told myself that cutting corners was necessary for competitiveness, that employees should be grateful for any work at all." I waited, saying nothing. "But the truth is simpler and uglier," Richard continued. "I enjoyed the power. I enjoyed making people smaller, so I could feel larger. I stole from you and dozens of others not because I needed the money but because I could." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you were right. About everything. My contempt for your education, my dismissal of your worth, my assumption that you would simply disappear after I fired you. All of it revealed exactly who I had become. A predator who fed on people's vulnerability." Richard leaned forward slightly. "I've been working with a nonprofit organization that provides legal assistance to exploited workers. Pro bono consulting on how wage theft operations work, helping investigators understand the mentality of employers who rationalize exploitation." I raised an eyebrow. "Redemption through service?" "Redemption might be too strong a word. Atonement, maybe. Trying to balance the scales, even though I know they'll never be even." Richard paused. "I heard you started your own organization." "How did you?" "Elena visits sometimes. She tells me about the good work being done with money recovered for my crimes. Hundreds of workers receiving back pay, dozens of employers facing prosecution, new federal regulations making exploitation harder." I felt a complex mix of emotions I couldn't easily categorize. "You expect me to forgive you?" "I expect nothing. But I wanted you to know that your courage and, yes, your revenge accomplished something I never could have imagined. You turned personal injury into universal justice. You transformed anger into protection for people who couldn't protect themselves." Richard stood to leave, then paused. "Maya, I have 8 years left on my sentence. When I get out, I'll be 67 years old with a federal conviction and no legitimate prospects. But if you ever need someone who understands exactly how these exploitation networks operate, someone willing to help in any way possible, I'll be available." He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving me alone with thoughts I hadn't expected to have. 5 years later, I stood before a congressional subcommittee delivering testimony about proposed legislation strengthening penalties for wage theft. The Patel Protocol, as it had been nicknamed by labor advocates, would create federal task forces specifically targeting multi-employer exploitation networks and provide whistleblower protections for employees reporting violations. The criminal conspiracy I helped expose was not an aberration, I told the assembled legislators. It was a systematic approach to theft that has been replicated in industries across the country. Conservative estimates suggest that wage theft costs American workers over $50 billion annually, more than all other forms of robbery combined. After my testimony, I walked through the Capitol building reflecting on the journey from Richard's elevator humiliation to federal policy advocacy. The Maya Patel Foundation for Worker Justice had grown from Elena's initial donation into a major force in labor rights, employing 47 people and helping thousands of exploited workers recover stolen wages. But perhaps more importantly, the Foundation's investigative work had led to the prosecution of 32 additional cases of systematic wage theft, recovering over $200 million for workers and establishing legal precedents that made similar schemes much more difficult to operate. Sarah Chun, now the Foundation's Director of Operations, met me outside the hearing room. "How did it go?" "I think we have the votes," I replied. "The bill should pass committee next week." As we walked toward our car, Sarah asked the question I had been expecting. "Richard gets out next month. Have you decided how to respond to his letters?" I had received dozens of letters from Richard over the past 2 years, each one detailing his work with prison literacy programs, his consulting with federal investigators on other exploitation cases, and his requests to somehow contribute to the Foundation's work. "I've been thinking about it," I said finally. "Not about forgiveness. That's too personal and too complicated. But about utility. He has knowledge and experience that could help our investigations. If he's genuinely committed to atonement, you'd work with him?" I considered the question as we drove through Washington traffic. I'd consider it. Under strict conditions, with complete transparency, and only if it served the Foundation's mission. Personal feelings can't override the opportunity to help more workers. It wasn't the ending I had envisioned when I first sat in my apartment plotting Richard's destruction. But perhaps that was the point. True justice wasn't about personal satisfaction or symbolic victory. It was about creating systems that protected vulnerable people and held powerful people accountable. The little girl with a community college degree had learned that the most powerful revenge wasn't destroying your enemies, it was transforming the world so that what they did to you could never happen to anyone else. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very smart, you could even transform your enemies into allies in that larger cause. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Morris, now director of the FBI's expanded labor crime division. "Congratulations on the testimony. We've got 3 new cases that could use Foundation support. Same pattern, different cities. Ready to do it again?" I smiled and typed back. "Always ready. Justice doesn't take vacations." Outside my car window, Washington, D.C. bustled with the energy of democracy in action, flawed, slow, but ultimately capable of change when enough people demanded it. I had learned to channel my anger into that machinery of change, turning personal pain into public policy and individual revenge into universal protection. It was, I reflected, a much more satisfying victory than anything I could have achieved alone. The Maya Patel Foundation for Worker Justice has recovered over $300 million in stolen wages and helped prosecute more than 200 cases of employment fraud. The organization's investigative techniques and legal advocacy were instrumental in passing the Worker Protection Enhancement Act, which created federal task forces specifically targeting wage theft and provided enhanced whistleblower protections. Maya Patel serves as the Foundation's executive director and continues to work closely with federal law enforcement agencies. Richard Blackwood was released from federal prison after serving 11 years of his sentence. He currently works as an unpaid consultant for worker advocacy organizations and has assisted in the prosecution of 15 additional wage theft cases. He and Maya Patel maintain a professional relationship focused solely on their shared commitment to preventing employment exploitation. The investigation that began with Maya's personal quest for justice ultimately exposed a wage theft network spanning 8 states and 47 employers, leading to the recovery of over $500 million in stolen wages and the implementation of new federal regulations that have been credited with reducing systematic employment fraud by an estimated 40% nationwide.